So I think we are slowly getting ready to start. So welcome again, everyone. Very happy to see so many people joining this webinar in the middle of the week. If you would like to use the captioning function, we have live English captions in the CC, the closed captions in the Zoom. So you can just click on the CC functionality. And because we know we have a lot of international attendees as well, we do also provide captions in other languages. So we have automatic machine learning translations into German, French, Spanish, and Swedish in this webinar. And you can follow direct links to these specific translations if you would like to have them. And my colleague will post them in the chat just now. So, Sie können das auf Deutsch lesen, wenn Sie dem im Chat angegebenen Link folgen. Vous pouvez lire les sous-titres en français si vous suivez les liens fournis dans le chat. Puedes leer el español si sigues el enlace provisto en el chat. Du kan läsa texten på svenska om du klickar på länken som vi lägger i chatten. And of course, we also provide a specific link to the English live captions for those of you who prefer to have that separately from the Zoom interface. We also have today a graphic recorder called Maja from Sweden, who is helping us with having a visual presentation of the content today. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the technology to work in a good way, so we are not showing that simultaneously, but we will share with you, of course, all the lovely illustrations afterward to help you and us remember what was revealed during this webinar. So very welcome also to Maja Larsson. And we will also, of course, reveal send a link with all the other illustration workshop that she's doing, a really fantastic artist supporting us with this. So, that's, I think, what we have for housekeeping. Please do use the Q&A function if you would like to pose a question to either myself or my colleague Sarah, who will be presenting today. And we will make sure to answer all the questions either within the time frame of the webinar, or if we don't have the time to answer all the questions, then we will make sure to reach out to you afterwards. So this is supposed to be interactive, so do ask us questions or comment as much as you like, but we will save the questions to the end. So the topic of today's webinar is cognitive accessibility. My name is Susanna Loren. I'm the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Funka, which means that I do all the fun things, and I have a fantastic team of researchers and project managers helping, or not helping me, but performing a lot of interesting research and innovation projects in Europe at the European level, at Nordic level, and national level simultaneously. We have more than 20 projects ongoing in parallel, so we have more than enough to do. Right now. And with me, I have my very dear colleague, Sarah Kjellstrand, who is this research strategist at Funka, and she is also specializing a lot in cognitive accessibility, and she's leading from our part this study that we will present today. The agenda that we have in front of us will start with an introduction where we present the scope of the study, just so you kind of setting the frames of what this is about. And then we will present what we have found so far in the literature review and desk research that we have done in the beginning of the project, focusing on cognitive barriers. And we will then also ask you for a little bit of input. So we will have a poll connected to the barriers. And of course, since this is a 2-hour webinar, we will have a short break so that you can have a cup of coffee or water or move around, do something to refresh your minds. And then we will continue with something around consequences and solutions, and also discuss with you if you think that we are on the right track, if we have found the right topics and areas so far, or if you have anything to add to it. And I'm sure you have a lot of interesting additional content for us, and we're more than happy to listen to all your suggestions and comments, of course. And then we will wrap up describing a little bit about the next steps and where you can contribute or continue to follow the study, and also if you would like to influence what we are doing and and making sure that we get all your inspiration from all of you and all latitudes of Europe and beyond into the study, because this is a really important matter to us and to the society, I think. So I will leave this to you, Sarah, to start with the presentation of the study.
So just before we start, I thought it could be good to just have an introduction on what we talk about when we talk about cognition on the web. So generally we use a definition of cognition that comes from psychology. So where cognition is about the processing of information. And in fact, at all times, whatever we are doing, the brain is constantly receiving signals from the environment and then trying to process that information and understand what the information is about and if we need to do something about it. And when we talk about information, often people think about the pure text or what we hear, I mean the words, but it's also about signals on other types of information that is important for us. Today, for example, it's very hot in here. So do I need to put on another sweater? No, I don't think so. Is it too hard or is it too soft where I'm sitting? Do I need to do something about that? Do we have several things running around in the background? Is there anything I need to think about? All these things go on in parallel at the same time as you are listening to me and as I'm reading, or you are also perhaps reading the text in the presentation. And if there are too many things going on at the same time, there is a risk of cognitive overload. And this is something that is true for everyone, regardless of whether or not you have a cognitive impairment. So, which is also why cognitive accessibility is so important for all of us. So what does it mean on the web? Well, for a brain-friendly website, it's good to have a clear structure so that you know where to find the information and you don't have to think too much about how to find what you came for. So something that could sound contradictory to the fact that there are many information sources going on at the same time is actually it could be good if you have 2 or more information sources that say exactly the same thing, because then you reinforce the message. So this is what multimodality is about. So say, for example, that you have a text, then if you have a picture illustrating the text, a relevant illustration that says the same thing, then it reinforces the message of the text. And also reversely, if you have, for example, an icon to click on, like the classic 3-bar hamburger icon for menu, then it also becomes easy to understand what that icon is for, what it does when you click on it. If you also have a short description saying menu at the side of it. And one thing that is really important to avoid cognitive overload is to have few distractions. So not to have too many things on the same site and not to have things that are flashing and attracting attention in different corners of the website. And also, of course, to have a site that provides help and support so that the user is not left alone with the questions they may have. Problem is, though, that in practice, there are too many websites that are difficult to understand. We are not going so much into the causes of why this is the case, but rather here in the study, we try to understand what the barriers are, what the consequences are, and how to make things better. So the European Commission has asked us to do a study on cognitive accessibility, what it is about, what the consequences are. And the part of the study is the ICF, which is a strategic communication consultancy. Funka, we are experts in web accessibility. We also have an advisory board, Christian Bühler and Sofia El-Amrani from Inclusion Europe. And the study has been commissioned by DG Connect in the European Commission. And it's a 1-year study, so we are now in the first half of the study. where we are very much in the information gathering and consultation process. So for the analysis, we will have to wait a bit until the end of the year, where we'll have more firm issues to present. For now, we are really interested in getting in as much information as possible. And the objective of it all, just to simplify it, is to also not only understand the situation, but really to come up with practical proposals to improve accessibility for persons with cognitive impairments, but also for all of us, really to make the web a bit easier to understand and interact with. So the research questions that we are looking at in this phase of the study is, what are the main barriers to cognitive accessibility on the web? What is a barrier in this context, in fact? And what are the consequences of these barriers? And also, of course, what kind of solutions can be put in place to have a more cognitively accessible web? And we have a rather classic methodology for the study. We are starting with a literature review, where we look very broadly, both at academic papers, research studies, and industry papers, from issues from standardization and from policy, and also, of course, end user studies, really anything from any stakeholder that is interesting. And also we have a broad consultation process where we talk to all stakeholders, end users, public sector, agents, and from private sector and from academia. So we first do the review, and then we have the consultation to see what we missed, basically, in the literature review, and to also get the input from stakeholders on what the research findings are. And then in the end, we do analysis where we look at both what we found in the review and what the stakeholders say. So we sort of wanted to apologize in advance for focusing on problems. We normally like to focus more on solutions, but first we need to define the problems to see, okay, so what is the situation on cognitive accessibility on the web right now? Where are the problems? And then we can start working on solutions. So this first workshop is quite focused on barriers and on situations with difficulties. But please don't despair, we will get to solutions in the end. There will also be another workshop in the autumn where we will probably be more forward-looking towards the analysis and also practical solutions. So cognitive barriers on the web, what is it about? When you look at web accessibility in terms of physical impairments, it's a lot about accessing the information. In cognitive accessibility is also about not only accessing, but really understanding the information and seeing how you can manipulate and deal with it. So when we are on the web, actually when we're doing anything that needs some part of our brain to function, we use different mental functions, such as concentration, memory, language, visuospatial, so to orient ourselves in surroundings where we are, social and emotional functions. And accessibility barriers can impact any of these functions or all of them at the same time. Then it becomes really difficult. But for example, if you have a barrier that distracts you, if there are lots of flashing things on the website, it makes it difficult to concentrate on the content. If there are loads of things that you need to input, such as passwords or login names, it can affect also your memory. It's difficult to remember what you're doing on the website at the same time as remembering all the things you need to input to get the information. Language, of course, if it's difficult to read, if the texts are difficult to understand, or if it's difficult to input information, that also impacts the language parts of the mental functions. And there could also be effects on the emotional and social. If there are things like flashing lights or that affects you and that it gets you in a state of excitedness, then it can be difficult also to concentrate and to understand the information. What is really important to remember always when we talk about cognition is that the situation matters a lot. So the individual capacity varies widely, not only between us all. We are also, I mean, some people are better at remembering things, other people can be better at sorting out information in a row of different things. So we all have our specialities as individuals, but also one person's capacity varies from day to day and from moment to moment. So if you are very tired, then it will be difficult, regardless of your capacity normally, to both understand and take in information and also to produce something. And this is true both for persons with cognitive impairments, but also for everyone. So the ability in a specific situation is really the result of the capacity plus the environments. What kind of support do you have at this moment? Do you have a person supporting you, or perhaps is the interface there to support you? So now we're going to talk about hard stuff. So stressful situations that you can find on the web. And there are many of them. Just to give you an example, if you have, like now after the pandemic, I think many people will be looking forward to going, booking a flight or a ticket somewhere. So imagine you have been looking forward to booking a ticket for a long time. So you go on the website and then you need to do the actual payment and you're transferred to the bank. And the bank looks like this. Okay, so this is really ugly, but it's on purpose. It's ugly and it's annoying because there are things blinking. So at the top now, and also now it goes up. So this was actually an additional stressful situation. But if you can keep to this website, it keeps on blinking and you have the name of the bank, you have something, a timer ticking down, you have a secure login sign in red that is blinking. You also have a field that it says enter encrypted passcode, whatever that means, that is also blinking, and an arrow going down to it, as well as the very cryptic code underneath, which should be some kind of caption. And at the same time, you have icons a bit all over the place and that are not explained. Some of them look like more of a fire exit with arrows going in every direction. And you really need to book this vacation. So what do you do? I mean, some people may get so stressed by they actually give up. So this is an example of one stressful situation. But there may be more of them. You can actually, whatever you do, you can find difficult situations. If you, for example, search for information on the web, if you book appointments or tickets, if you use public services, such as your tax declaration, if you have meetings or chatting with people, I mean, there have been a number of funny for some incidents on the web with Zoom meetings going on in every kind of way with filters and muting and unmuting. These things can be very stressful. If you go shopping, then you also have to find items, put them in a basket. There are lots of different elements that go into these kind of situations. Everything that has to do with payment and banking, of course, like we saw in the example just now, or if you are sharing and creating information, it could also be difficulties. So now we would like to ask you, what kind of situations do you find the most difficult to understand and that you find most stressful from a concentration point of view or from any kind of cognitive point of view? So now I leave to Sana for the poll.
Yes, so we have created this poll just to make sure that we have found the most important parts and situations where problems can occur. So I can see that people are already answering this, and you can of course tick many of these or as many of these examples as you would like to. But if you think of either from your own situation or from people that you are taking care of, or your family or friends, or you can answer from a very personal perspective, or if you're a researcher, then maybe what you see in your research. So I know we really have attendees from many different stakeholder groups here. So we started from my own perspective here, asking problems often occur when I do different things. So, but search for information, book appointments or tickets, use public services, have meetings or chat with people, when I shop online, when I make payments and use the online bank or app, or when I share and create content. So we'll just leave that on for a little while more. People are still answering. So there is no true or false here. We're just happy to get your input on this. So live, which is kind of nice. And yes, we do get a comment in the chat that polls can be stressful also, and that is very true. Polls usually have a timeout, so of course it's stressful, and also it's a lot of information to take in, and then you need to action on it. So definitely polls are also a cognitively interesting situation that could, I'm sure, be made in different ways, but we thought it would be really relevant and interesting because, well, if we would have had a small group, we could have started this doing breakouts and having more live discussions, but with 400 participants, it's really hard to do that in a good way. So that's why we chose to have the polls instead. So now I think we can close the poll and share the results so we can see what the verdict of the jury is. So 59%, it seems like all the examples that we have put in there has been relevant to at least some people. And I would like to encourage you also, if you have a favorite problem area or a challenge that you think that doesn't fit into to our categories, then please reach out to us in the Q&A or chat, or just send us an email, because we really would like to know if we have covered the most relevant areas here. So the results of this little poll is that book appointments or tickets, that's the area where most of the people who participated in the poll has chosen. So that has 59%. And then it's a close call between use public services with 45 and shop online 44. Also making payments and use an online bank or bank app is 42%. And share and create content is 35%. And then we have search for information, that is 27%, and have meetings or chat with people, 26%. So according to this very unscientific poll, and based on the results of you, and we of course cannot determine if the people registered for this webinar is a statistically relevant selection of everyone. But according to this poll, at least, we can see that all the areas that we have identified so far seem to be relevant to many people. And we can also see that several of you have chosen more than one area or situation. So I think that means that we are at least on the right track, and that we can continue to dig in more research and literature that are focusing on these things. We also have some comments in the chat, and this is also a cognitive load, trying to do many things. So we have one comment on the Swedish app for booking the COVID-19 vaccine. Must have been the most stressful experience I've ever had. Yes, I won't comment on that because I don't know if that is the most stressful, but I'm sure many of these are very stressful. We have seen that also in user testing. So we have a question about the presentation, and yes, we will, this webinar is recorded. I'm sorry, I should have told you that in the beginning, and we do put the recording up on our YouTube channel, so we will send the link to you, and also if you would like to share, to have the presentation, of course, you can also have the presentation sent from our side, so that is not a problem. And then we have a comment on that all these examples could be difficult for a person with intellectual disabilities because it's not easy to find information written in an easy to read language. And that is, of course, very true. That goes for all areas or situations. So that is absolutely correct. And try to receive the certificate for traveling. I guess that has to do with COVID again. Yeah. And then, so now everyone is competing about the worst booking thing. So I'll let that sit there. So, but very good. So if you have anything that you don't think can sort of fit into these categories, then please let us know. And that would be extremely interesting also to hear your stories. And I see now that we have very specific examples of things that doesn't work well. And that is also interesting because we can look into them and try to understand what is the most stressful thing. So thank you for sharing that. But at this stage in the study, we are trying to get the broad picture so that we understand that we are focusing on the right areas. So really, it would also be very useful for us if you think there is something missing here, or if we haven't stumbled over all the areas that are relevant. So what do you say, Sarah? Are you surprised by the results of the survey, or is this more or less what you had foreseen?
I'm wondering if I didn't do a bit of, I mean, it's, since the example that I was discussing just before is about booking appointments, ticket and banking, then it's sort of leading on to that. So it's always easy to think of things that are top of mind. This is sort of a magician trick. But in the research, what we have seen, the studies are really about these topics. So it's, yeah, it seems to confirm what we have found so far, at least.
Okay, so maybe we should close the results of the polls. We can also share that with you afterwards if anyone is interested, of course. And then I think we will go on with more content before we end up in the next question for the audience.
Yeah, and now I have...
And we do get a lot of comments in the chat, so thank you very much for that. I won't comment on all of them, but really there's a lot of good things. So thank you for all your comments and contributions. That's super helpful. Thank you.
So now I have accessibility problem. The poll is still showing on my screen. I'm wondering if it's just mine. But anyway.
You can just click it, the red.
Yeah, there were too many. This is a classic condition issue. Actually, there are 3 overlay layers of things that Zoom want to show me at the same time. And the button to hide is hidden behind everything. Yeah. So that's interesting.
And of course, every time you enter a new meeting in Zoom or Teams or whatever you're using, I counted to more than 10 different video conference systems in my computer. Every time I use one of them, they have changed the interface. So I need to relearn. That's really the life in the pandemic for you. So
yeah. Okay, so if we go into the detail of what causes this stress, I mean, is it actually is stressful in these kind of situations? Then we have, going back to the example of the bank, there is the password and CAPTCHA, and this is really an area where we have seen that the research is pointing to difficulties for many people, because it's difficult to understand what you're going to input, what the expectations are. and the instructions are not very clear, and it's difficult to remember. You have to remember both. Okay, so what am I going to do on the website, and then in the first place, and then what is my username, which is sometimes not obvious, and also the password. And usually, all the interfaces prompt us to have as complicated passwords as possible, so that it's more difficult to get hacked. Okay, but how do you remember all these passwords? I think that I did the account, I had 170 different passwords for different things. Sometimes I use often, and sometimes very seldom. So it's completely impossible to remember everything. And the whole process of putting in a password in the form, which requires several mental processes to go on in parallel. So if you have difficulties in remembering things, then it would also impact your ability to concentrate and to understand the information. So it's sort of a series of problems building up. And then the other issue with the famous bank example here is that there were lots of icons that didn't really, it's too much clutter. You don't really know where to focus. And that makes it hard to keep focus, and also hard to find the information if you have to wade through everything that is on the website to get to what you're supposed to be doing. And of course, the timeout that causes both stress, and it's also another aspect of it, it's difficult to plan. If, for example, if you are in the middle of a process of booking a ticket, and then you all of a sudden need to go get your bank card and you have 5 minutes to do it, if you don't know in advance that there is a timeout and how long the timeout is, then this is a major cause for stress. But there are more of them. And so what we found is there are broadly 2 categories of barriers, and one is to do with understanding. If you have lots of texts, how can you actually know what they mean, and how can you get to the information you need? And it's also very seldom that the information is easy to read, or even in a slightly plain language format. And then there are barriers that is related to doing things on the web. So all these buttons and icons, what do they do? And if you are a person that is a bit unsure of how IT works, then you're not really going to mix. I mean, okay, the computer may not blow up, but you may be thrown out. A classic thing, just going back to myself, is that I always confuse which command I should do for the @ sign. And what happens if you do wrong is that you get thrown out of the window and you go into another window. And I always get as surprised every single time. So these are the kinds of barriers. If there is not enough explanations, then strange things can happen. And we have also found a list of common difficulties, which is finding the most important information on the page among lots of information, understanding, and it can be both to do with easy to read, but also the context of the text, not only the words per se, but really in what context the text is about. And then you have the understanding and using controls. Controls can be drop-down menus, buttons, menus, anything that is clickable, really. Keeping focused on what you're doing is also one major difficulty. To manage time, handling timeouts, and also assessing how long time it will take. How long do I need to sit in front of this? If I know that I have a concentration span of an hour or 30 minutes, how long time will I be able to do what I came to do in this time, or do I need to plan it for another day? Fill out forms. That's also a very common difficulty, to understand the form and to manage time, and really everything comes into the filling out of forms. To manage passwords, as we've seen, and then the navigation and orientation. So going from one part of the website to another to find information and get back again, or to leave the website to look for other information. So now there's another poll. Which ones of these difficulties do you recognize from your own experience?
So yes, so another stress moment of trying to fill in the poll. So when I use the web, I often find it difficult to, for example, find the most important information or understand the information. And again, as Sarah said, this is usually not only the specific text, but also the context, at least according to our user research. Understand and use the controls to keep and stay focused on the topic, and to manage time for answering the poll or whatever it is you are doing, to fill out forms in any form. There is a lot of forms to fill in on the web. Manage passwords, and I've seen quite a lot on that in the chat already, that the password issue is really a difficult one for many people, or something many recognize at least. And then to go between websites or go from one part of the website to another. So we will leave the poll open for a while. And again, if you have a challenge or a problem that you really feel is important to you, please share it with us. And I mean, if you don't find a suitable category in the poll, then we would be extremely happy if you would like to give an example that we can put in into the research. So it seems like most of the participants have voted already. So maybe we should end this and share the results to see if we have managed to do something valuable. So what do we have here? Well, manage passwords, that was the winner, the clear winner. 72% says that managing passwords is one of the difficult things to do on the web. So not very surprisingly, but a good confirmation of what is really difficult for many users. And then with 58%, we have to find the most important information. So I think that is something that is, at least from a kind of technical perspective, much easier to solve than maybe the password thing, because that has a lot of security issues. And I'm sure there are many better ways to do it, but still there is a layer of complexity that is needed for passwords. But really for the users to find the most important information, that shouldn't be impossible for the website owner to try to make sure that you can focus on the right thing. With 46%, we have go between websites or from one part of the website to the other. And I think this one can be maybe a little bit difficult because the example is not as clear as the other ones, but really when we do focus on when we are having many tabs or windows open at the same time, that is also kind of a stressful thing to go from one thing to the other, of course. We have 37% claiming that keeping focused is the most problematic thing, or one of the problematic issues at least. And then we have a group of 27% where we have managed time and fill out forms. That is at least a little interesting to me. I'm always thinking that filling out forms is extremely difficult for many users, but obviously in this group that is not as high as the other ones. And then we have with 23% understand information and 22% understand and use controls. So I guess you could kind of group them as well if you like. So do you have any comments or thoughts on these results, Sarah?
I think it's interesting to see also that finding the most important information is so difficult because, as you say, it's easier to fix, and it should also be in the interest of website owners to actually help out. I mean, if you want to retouch with the information, it should be easy to find. And then, yeah, we'll see what we get more in the research. We haven't really been able to dig into this so much so far. So it would be interesting if you have any in the audience, any studies or any information that is detailed on one of these issues, then it would be really welcome. Because what we can see is that there are lots of general guidelines that are even more general than these ones. But when it comes to fixing problems in reality, often there is a need for a very detailed solution on these.
Yes, and there's also a lot of interesting discussions going on in the chat, mainly on the hassle of passwords and how you can deal with them, but also, of course, that password requirements are so different between different websites. And that, I would say, working a lot with standardization, that is something that should be, I think, in my view at least, standardized, because it shouldn't be that the level of security is so different that sometimes you cannot use specific characters, but in some other places you need to use these specific characters. So that's, I think, why you have, how many did you say? More than 100 passwords, Sarah, because they can't be the same because there are different requirements in different websites. That is crazy. I mean, we as a society should be able to make life a little bit easier, at least for people, by making them more standardized. That is my view, at least, on this. So we have comments on financial services that are based on advertisements, and this is, of course, a problem because it's difficult to focus and to see what is the advert and what is the real content. So I think that is also something we have found in our own research and user tests and so on. I do not know if we have found so much real scientific research from other sources on this specific thing around advertisements, Sarah. Did we look into that? Or
so far we haven't found anything, but it is really interesting. I mean, we know what we know from user tests and at Funka from before, but there's not so much research on that. What we've seen in the research studies is that usually they are managed in a sort of protected environment, which means that the interfaces they are testing have been developed specifically for the studies. So you don't have these third-party solutions that come into place.
So, Christian, if you have any research from your university or somewhere else that you know of that really show this with advertisements, that would be extremely helpful for us to look into, because that's, I think, as far as I know, at least, we haven't seen any kind of real research on that. So that's a very good comment. Thank you. And yeah, password. And then, yeah, inconsistency in forms, that suddenly it looks like you haven't entered something, and the same in shopping carts, that they kind of change the how they look, and it's difficult with the reset and so on. And yeah. Safety is another one, of course, safety and privacy. I think these are two big issues that we don't really focus on in this study, but of course that also adds on the layer of complexity. How much safety or privacy do we need to provide, and how many, I don't care about the cookies, things do you click without actually reading any of it or understanding it, and so on. So that's another layer of complexity, of course, around this whole thing. So yeah, and somebody says that I like the polls. It's interesting to hear the results, to hear that we struggle with much of the same. So yes, that's, I agree. And it's also kind of comforting that it's not only in very specific groups, but really many of these things are quite general. So I think that also confirms what we have been saying for a long time. And then we have a question on how many attendees answered the polls. Well, we had over 80% in both of them. I can't remember the exact numbers, but but I don't see the number of people. I just see the percentage, but at least that's quite many. And the problem with difficulty in finding the most important information is that different users will have different beliefs on what they consider important. Yes, of course, that is absolutely true. But usually there is a way of at least taking out the not so necessary information. We have done research previously in a national research project where we tried to make sure that we start with kind of, I don't know what to call it, a summary, but something that is really useful for everyone. And then if you need in-depth information, then you sort of have another click. So you don't start with kind of everything, but you start with something that you believe, right or wrong, that the majority of the users find important. So, and then you can either you can go to the legal part of this, or the more the sources behind it, or the in-depth information, or you can also choose other formats or other ways of going about it. So I think it's not a one size fits all. You can always tell what's the most important. I agree, that's not as simple as that, but I do think that a lot of interfaces that we see are cluttered with things that I'm quite sure that the website owner do not believe is the most important message they want to send, at least. And we can also clearly see that really the placement of objects and so on the screen really makes people focus on one thing instead of the other. So if you make the advertisements super big and sort of flashing in your face, then that will be a distraction to many people. So I still think there are things we could do with kind of sorting out the important things for at least many of the users. Yeah, and now there's so many comments I can't comment on them all. But I think we could also get back to this maybe afterwards. We have a place for questions. We do also have some specific questions in the Q&A. So please, if you have any questions for Sarah, then place them in the Q&A, and we can also open the microphones if you would prefer to speak. But we need to we will save that to the end. So I believe we can go on, Sarah.
Yeah, I think we have the break.
We have the break. Wow, that's fantastic. That's perfect. So standardization wise, after 45 to 50 minutes, you are supposed to have the break, and we timed it perfectly. That was more more luck than anything else. Or maybe I just feel in my body that I need another cup of coffee and I need to stretch my legs or do something, or rather take a shower, but I won't do that. So we meet again. Is 10 minutes enough, Sarah? We didn't agree on this, but...
If you're going to take a shower, it won't be enough, but for us, the rest of us, it should be fine, I think, no?
Okay, so let's meet again at exactly 2 o'clock Central European Summertime. That is now 9 minutes from now, but make sure to move around and drink something, do something nice, and relax your brain for a while, and then we'll meet again at 2 o'clock. Okay, so now it's 2 o'clock. I didn't have a shower, by the way, but I went outdoors, and that was a super bad idea because it's just warmer, but I got a little bit of fresh air and wind at least. So thank you for allowing that. We will have an open Q&A in the end of this session, so please do post questions in the Q&A if you would like to ask anything to Sarah or me. And I did get a message that some of the questions that I picked up from the chat was obviously not shared in the chat with everyone, but only sent to the panelists. And I'm sorry for confusing everyone there, but that's another type of accessibility issue because the chat is so small on to be able to have all the things that I need on my screen. And the chat is so small that I really can't read who it's for. I can barely read the questions as such. So I'm sorry for that, but we will collect all the questions and the discussions that have been posted in the chat that are not kind of secret or private with all of you, so that you also know what we were referring to during the presentation. So thank you for letting us know or letting me know that I was confusing everyone. So, and I also got another comment saying you didn't even present Funka, and that's true. We didn't want this to be kind of a marketing event for the company, but of course, as we have so many registrants, we don't know if all of you know us from before. We are a consultancy based in Sweden. We also have offices in Norway and Spain, and we are working with accessibility. We were started once upon a time from the disability organizations, but now we are a commercial company. And around 80% of the turnover comes from consultancy in accessibility, and 20% comes from research and innovation. So that's the department that is presenting today. So research and innovation also covers studies and investigations and many other things in Funka. So thank you for reminding me. I should have remembered to present the company that we are presenting from. But I'm sure you will have also links to everything relevant that we do after this presentation. So moving on, we are now going to talk a little bit about the consequences of these barriers that we have looked into already in the literature review and research review that we have done so far in the project. And I'm showing a kind of famous or infamous photo that has circulated for a long time in accessibility community, but I still like it. It's showing a ramp that is more or less fulfilling most of the basic standards for a ramp, but the ramp ends up in the middle of a stair, so it doesn't really help anyone. And this is what can sometimes happen. Even if you do follow standards, then still it can become a bad result if you don't use them in the right way. And that goes, I think, for many solutions and many even good, good ideas and intentions. Sorry. And if we don't know why we are doing things, then the risk that we are kind of trying to solve problems but ending up in the wrong place is kind of evident. And also the whole area of cognitive accessibility is still far too little researched, according to us at least. And that's why we also, I don't think that the society at large understands how many, what the consequences are of the barriers that we all put together for all of us, including people with cognitive disabilities. So we're very happy to be able to perform this study, of course, so that we can dig deep into these things, or even deeper. So we all know, I think today, especially after a year of the pandemic, or 1.5 years, the importance of the web. Everything we do nowadays, or many of us at least, have some kind of digital flavor to it. So we are digitalizing work, studies, social life, political life. Many different aspects of our lives circulate or focus around the web. And of course, if the web isn't accessible to everyone, then that is really a big problem. So that goes without saying. We have also seen in the last couple of years that public services are increasingly entering into the digital arena. I mean, that has happened a lot in some countries already, but we see also now in all our markets that what was a couple of years ago called an e-service, but the only E was that they took the form in a PDF document that was before on paper. Now they've converted it into a PDF and put it online. That's not really e-service, is it? But more and more, the public organizations are now actually converting this into kind of real services, digital services, which is good because then they are also covered by the Web Accessibility Directive and they should be accessible. What is less good is, of course, that the Web Accessibility Directive, the minimum requirements of the directive, is very weak when it comes to the cognitive part. So we still have a big gap there. But anyway, the public services are converting most of their services and information to a digital format, and that could be really good from an accessibility standpoint and also really good for people with cognitive disabilities, of course, but only provided that the information doesn't provide all these barriers that we have just talked about before the break. So the web is being increasingly important for independence and for more or less everything in life, or it can be, it doesn't have to be, but still, if you are outside of the internet ecosystem, then you usually pay more for services, it takes longer time, you need to do more, you need to have more support in what you do and so on. So many of the European member states are really pushing users into the digitalized world. And of course, it's efficient, it's good. I mean, there are many positive things, and also not least in education, this is really the case. And the pandemic has kind of enhanced this, but still, if it doesn't work for one individual, then we have an even bigger problem, because what we see with our clients in public sector is that they think that we provide this on the web, and that means that it's accessible for everyone, it's kind of open, so that means that we solve that problem. And as we all know, that is not really true, and especially not for people who struggle with understanding the information. And I personally think that really the understandability, if that's a word, of content is really one of the key issues, specifically when it comes to public sector websites and content. It's usually, or often at least, very, very hard to understand what I'm supposed to do to make this, whatever service I need, happen. So this means that the digital accessibility for people with cognitive impairments is more important now than ever before. And I mean, I think that the European Commission and experts in the field have been knowing this for a long time, but the pandemic has really shown even more how important this is. On the other hand, if it works, or when it works, it does improve independence and really empowerment for end users. So in the literature review that we have performed in the beginning of this study, we have found quite interesting findings. Well, for example, that the web is very important. We are not the first ones stating that, of course, but really we find many more studies when it comes to kind of the social, soft human parts of life and society when it comes to cognitive disabilities. So if we compare with what we find when we look into physical disabilities, this is a big difference. So we don't find many studies focusing on people with cognitive disabilities in the workplace or in the educational system or political sort of participation in society and so on. But it's all kind of social and nice, which is of course also important, but it's really not everything. Also, we haven't found much on the cultural side or on sports, or I mean, there are many things that we don't find many studies in. And I'm kind of generalizing, of course there are studies, but really most of the things that we have found are in the social area. So if you know anything else, even in a language that we do not speak, please provide us with support and links and ideas. We would be super happy to have a broader view on this, because now it seems like this has all been done a little bit like from a caregiver perspective, if you see what I mean. So not much independence and empowerment in the way many of the research studies have been done so far. Also, when we try to connect the knowledge out there on cognitive barriers and cognitive needs, there are a lot of knowledge, of course, already produced, but we don't find very much details on what this actually means. Okay, so we have this barrier. We know that people have struggled with this or that, but what does it mean? Where does that lead to? How can we solve it? I mean, there's a big step from understanding that we have groups that perceive these challenges and to understand what this means and provide solutions. So that it seems to be that most of the research studies we have found at least doesn't go that way. It's more like digging into the problems. Extremely important, of course, but also not only in this study, but we all as a society and community, I think, need to make sure that we take that knowledge and convert it into something that can be standardized and can be put into solutions. So hopefully we can take a little bit of a step in that direction, and with your help, I hope. The details are lacking in many of the studies we have looked into so far, but again, the access to the web is of course important. And this is something that it seems crazy to say that in 2021, that we need to state it again, as if that wasn't kind of known. But I mean, also in more or less well-developed countries in the North, we have seen that important information on the COVID and on vaccination and so on was not provided in an accessible format at all. Much of the information, at least in the beginning, were extremely hard to understand for anyone. And also we have seen that a lot of the services provided are really done from a very internal perspective. So not focusing on user needs or user requirements, but just what does our little institution need here? And then we just put that on the web and hope for the best. So how important is the web and who is it important for? Also, we have found some very disturbing facts on care homes and elderly homes and so on, where some people with different kind of disabilities, but specifically with cognitive disabilities live, where they don't even have Wi-Fi connection. So obviously someone has thought that this group of people don't need the internet. To me, that is a scandal in any country, but when it's in high-taxed countries like our own, and that is highly disturbing. So we need to state that the access to the web is important. I'm sorry to repeat that, but I think that is important for everyone to understand. So another set of gaps that we have found so far in the research is really that we know that the digital divide, it varies among user groups and different needs and so on. But we don't really, we haven't found any comprehensive studies comparing this or trying to put everything together to make sure that we as a society understand what to do about it. So we have bits and pieces here and there, and many of the studies are focusing on one user group and one situation only, and that's fine, that's really in depth, but we really lack the kind of holistic view on cognitive as a whole. There's also a general lack of details on what this means. So it's a lot of behavior and needs and demands and things like that. But as Sarah said, often interfaces are kind of prototypes or drafts, sketches. So it's really hard to understand how can we take this information and put it in work, so to speak, in our own interface or in our own website. So there's a big gap, I think, between the knowledge that is out there somewhere in research and what is really usable and actionable for people who are responsible for web interfaces or IT vendors who are selling things and creating things. Of course, that is also a stakeholder, important stakeholder that should know about this. Also, there is a general lack of data. Statistical data and other kind of data where we can see like age groups and education and gender and so on. And specifically a lack of data when it comes to the business case. And I personally believe that the business case for accessibility is something we always need to kind of reconsider and get back to, because if we can't prove that this is important, then legislation and policies will never do the whole job for us. That is not where innovation is created, in my view, at least. So I think it would be very, very interesting to have more specific studies looking into the business case for cognitive accessibility, and really showing how much better it becomes for large groups of users. So that's kind of a favorite potential project that we will try to get funding for in the next stage. We have already a long list of things we would like to do after this study. So stay tuned. We will keep working on this. And then moving into solutions, and here I again would like to hear from the audience what you think, if you have the same idea as we have, or the same thoughts around this. So we see mainly solutions in like 3 big chunks or areas. So you can, if you want to solve or mitigate at least cognitive barriers on the websites and digital services, then you can try to do general solutions on society level. So that's kind of for everyone. You try to make sure that the solutions fit everyone, and that way it's very democratic and open, and everyone gets the same opportunities, and knowledge is spread and so on. So very generic societal level solutions. Or you say that this specific user group with this, maybe this diagnosis or this category or these user needs, I mean, the grouping can be made in many different ways, but this specific group needs this kind of specific support. So one clear example, I think, is sign language. That is something that would be, that doesn't really help everyone in society, but it does really help people who are born deaf and who have sign language as their maternal language. So that is a group, it's a service that can be provided to a group and really support that group in a good way, but would be not very efficient to provide to everyone on a societal level. Of course, the policy can be on society level, saying that this group has this right, but still the solution is kind of focused on one specific group. Or the third kind of way of doing solutions could be on the individual level. So that is really specifically to one individual, to one person. So my specific needs, solutions that are done for me, could be my work environment or my computer. I should have a bigger screen, for example, or it could be assistive technology or other tools and support measures that are made specifically to the specific individual. And because we know, of course, that I mean, that is also not news for anyone, but people with disabilities are just as different and individual as everyone else. Surprise. So of course, I mean, from a kind of a political standpoint, everyone should have an individual solution. But I hope you understand how we think about this. This has more to do with legal structures and standards and requirements and policy and things. So at which level in society do we actually solve things? So I lost track of the chat, but I hope that that we get some ideas and comments on this. If you feel we don't have a poll on this one, so but just an open question: is this, do you kind of follow this idea on that there are 3 levels of support measures or levels on solutions that could be recommended from our side, or is this complete gibberish? Okay, so now everyone has gone into a coma, or my question was absolutely incomprehensible. Okay, now we get some pragmatic sense. Sounds like a good start, makes sense. Good, thank you. Okay, so we at least start there, and I agree this is a good start, or a starting point. So we will continue to look into this from this perspective, and then during the study, we may change or add or have another kind of level of complexity, because this is, of course, just one way of kind of or a typology or a way to categorize things. So thank you for the heads up on that one. I also would like to mention, of course, one of my favorite things is standardization. So there is really a case for standardization here. And this, of course, is also something that we have already been looking into from Funka in another one of our research projects on cognitive criteria, where we have tried to test new criteria for cognitive accessibility. So, but just on a general level, not to promote our own ideas, but just what we have seen here is really that many of these requirements seem kind of generic. So if you say it's too much clutter on a website, many people would agree with that. It's just more disturbing for some than for others. So it's very easy to see that many of the recommendations and the requirements and user needs that we can identify when it comes to cognitive accessibility is really, really helpful for all users. It's just on a different level of how important it is. So it seems to us that there should be a possibility for to standardize some of these things and not making it as difficult as it has so far been perceived, because well, that's a long discussion in itself, but today the standards, the minimum requirements of the legislation are covering physical disabilities more or better than cognitive. And a lot of work is done not only by us, but for many other groups as well to bridge this gap. And I'm really looking forward to that happening before I retire, because I think it needs to. But the situation today is that we have legislation that doesn't really take care of these user groups, and they are huge. So that needs to be done. We have also seen in our own research, and also in some of the research studies we have found that also very subtle design changes, very small things that you move around, or you provide something very, very a small thing that you think this can't be this important. It really means a lot to many people. So very, very small things. And that's why we think it could be done, and it's really feasible and implementable. Because in the other research project we have carried out, we have worked together with ICT suppliers, with public sector body website owners, and with end users, of course, with disabilities, but also accessibility experts, to make sure that the criteria can be measurable in one way or another, and also implementable. And I think in this study as well, we see already that some of the steps taken, I mean, some things are bigger, like, for example, you should translate every content into easy to read. Okay, that's a big thing. If you need to kind of translate everything out there into easy to read, that will require some resources. But really, when we create new interfaces, if we just use some of the very small things that make it easier for people to understand how two objects are connected together, which objects are clickable, where things end, how many steps are there in this service that I'm doing, or the poll that I'm doing. All of these small things that really support everyone and doesn't crash anything. It's not difficult to implement. It's just common sense. It makes it easier for everyone. And for some user groups with cognitive disabilities, this is really essential. So this is what we need to do as a hygiene basic factor to make sure that these groups are have the possibility to use the web in an independent way. So if we look at the societal level, really this could be, of course, more of a general policy. It could be legislation, it could be standards, but really these parts should be beneficial for all. So all the things that we talk about and the findings we have, all the solutions that we, after some more months, will recommend, that we want the society to take care of on the kind of overall level, that will be, of course, something that is generic for all the population. But we also have the question, of course, that, okay, if we do this, if this is the solution, we need to be careful, because we do know that one size doesn't really fit all. So this needs to be done very careful and not too detailed. the society level needs to be kind of rights and opportunities and possibilities and funding and so on, but not too specific, because then it becomes a problem instead of a solution. So the generic society level solutions need to be kind of open and flexible and generic. At the group level, we are talking about more specific needs, or needs that are specific to one user group. And again, this doesn't have to do with specific diagnosis or specific gender or specific age group or anything. So the groups can be very different, and the typology and categorization needs to be kind of cleverly thought about. But really, if you think about groups for either mental abilities or user needs, so that's what we talk about on the group level. So an interesting finding so far in the study is that this group level solution idea is very common in the research that we have found. So that's a common approach that many talk about. But in standardization, this is generally not the fact. So the standards try to cover a very broad kind of holistic view of every user. This should be usable in all situations and in all contexts and in all countries and for all users and so on. So we try to kind of cover everything, which is of course natural, but it's interesting. This is an interesting gap between kind of the perspective of research and the perspective of standardization. And we will, I'm sure we will dig deeper into that and see if that is something we can discuss more later on, or if that is just something that we see and report. But I think that there's something interesting in there. The individual approach, of course, seems to be very kind of democratic and nice, and it's good to have the individual support always. But really, as the needs vary so much between different user groups and different user needs on the exact individual level, then this needs to be very flexible, because we see today that many of the systems that are providing assistive technology or other kind of solutions, they are, even if they are meant to be individual, they're still based on some kind of box, and people don't fit in boxes, I'm sorry. So this needs to be much more flexible and much more kind of starting with the individual and the individual needs. So this is something that is really important for this level of solution to be successful. If done in the right way, it does promote independence, of course, but it also kind of, it's a balance between the promotion of independence and a potential stigma if you need to ask for something specific, or if you have to have some clumsy assistive technology that nobody else has, or what do I know. So it's also something you need to be a little bit careful about when you talk about the individual solutions. Also, it's extremely important that these solutions are easy to use. I mean, that goes for all solutions, of course, but if the individual is sort of left with a tool or assistive technology or a method to do something, and there is very little training and no one to ask and no support in this and so on, then it becomes even more important, because the individual is then more or less left alone with trying to solve his or her own problems. So the ease of use becomes even more important when we talk about the individual solutions. So I think we have now reached the part where we can open up for questions, and we have had some quite a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I will try to go through these. Oh, these are in other languages. That is now also a cognitive load for me. So how should we address fatigue, which is one of the most common symptoms among, for example, people who are suffering from stroke or other illnesses in the brain? Sorry, I can't say this in a good way in English. Oh, it was translated. Thank you. How do you address fatigue to make your site accessible for those who had stroke or other disease that limit their cognitive function? Perfect. A person with much better level of English than myself. Thanks a lot for that. So, Sarah, do you have a good answer to this one, the fatigue question?
I think in general, I mean, looking at all the studies and the standardizations as one, and research says another thing, then it becomes really, really difficult to pinpoint what actually helps for everybody that has a specific condition, whatever the condition is. So for me, it's a bit abstract to say, so how can we help with everything that has to do with that problem? I think it needs to be looked at in a specific context. So what does the fatigue mean? Perhaps it means that there is a need for more time to do something. And it really depends on what we affect, what kind of issues a specific condition affects in the web context. And perhaps I can, because I saw there was another question that was sort of linked when we talked about mental functions. Somebody asked how the executive functions come into this. And so I remember now that what I should have said is that, you know, the picture and of the different mental functions that I presented earlier is not the definitive one of everything that has to do with mental functions. In fact, this is a very simplified picture, and also these kind of categories are defined differently in different studies. I would say that the most recognized definition of mental functions is probably the ICF framework from the World Health Organizations. But then now going through different sources, there are different definitions of specific impairments, definitions of functions, what they mean in different contexts. So this will be, we're just starting the analysis now, and it will be a major work to sort out the definitions talking about these things. And that is perhaps something that we should also keep in mind for the analysis and the solutions. What is the most fruitful approach? Is it really to look at a barrier? So how do we solve a barrier like the passwords, for example? Or should we look more at, so how do we help people to concentrate better or to understand information better? And for now, we don't really have an answer to that, but it's an interesting, really interesting discussion. And this is also a point where we would really appreciate any comments or specifically studies and research that could point us in different directions, because this is just a general feeling from looking at the sources now. It's that I feel that researchers have been very specific in one specific box, looking at a specific type of intersource and a particular demographic on the one hand, and then we have standardization sources that could have a whole range of ways of getting through the recommendations, but the recommendations are very general. So how do we combine the different approaches, and where does the standardization sort of approach stop? I saw somewhere that W3C, the Kolga group of research, said that with general technique, you can reach 90% of persons with cognitive impairments. But then there is this really specific parts that needs to be solved with particular measures for different groups. And this is where it starts to get interesting for real. Where does it stop? And how can we include everybody?
Okay, thank you. So we have another question here. I work in a library and struggle to structure the best ways to help our patrons to navigate the web. Do you have any ideas that could help me? That's not a small question. I especially work with patrons who have cognitive and intellectual disabilities. So on the go web accessibility consultation. Do you have any ideas, Sarah?
It's difficult to, again, in true consultancy, we would look at the particular issues, of course, and do lots of user testing. But again, like just giving a politician's sort of answer, which is in a completely different direction. I was surprised to see that there are loads of different recommendations. So perhaps a good start could be to just look at some of the general recommendations there are on cognitive accessibility. And I think that we can probably provide already now some basic information on what we have found so far, the sources that are interesting to share with everyone, and also to see, to check with you, what did we find, where are the gaps? But this is also something that I find interesting. There is a part of the web accessibility community that says that no, we don't have enough information on cognition. It's simply not known enough. We need to do another 40 years of research to find out any solid requirements. And then you have another part that comes up with a whole lot of sometimes crazy, but often very common sense advice. So there is a lot of things out there.
Yeah, it's true, and I also wanted to add that navigation is, I mean, that's again one of the problems with inconsistency on the web. If all websites had more or less the same navigational structure, okay, that would be kind of boring for many people, but it would also be extremely much easier if we could find the same patterns, at least in websites. And I think we are now involved in a other research project where we focus on payment systems, and we have managed to kind of extract the common structures, at least on online shopping and so on, and provide, now we are developing it right now, but creating a training arena where you can kind of try out how online shopping is working without buying things you don't like and without losing money. So kind of a closed community for that. And then we add gamification things and motivation so that you can go stepwise and learn more and more. And I think that is specifically for people with cognitive disabilities. And I think something similar to that could be done also on kind of navigating the web as such, even if it's much more difficult to have generic ideas about how navigation works. But if you know the people, what their interests are or what kind of websites they are looking at, and possibly also the country or the region they are in, because really when we look at websites from all over the world, but mainly in Europe, and we see so many differences in how the kind of the common way of doing things really differ between different member states in the European Union only. So it's not like an accessible website in this country is exactly the same as an accessible website in the other, even though we do have harmonized standards. Still, just the way we usually do things are so different. So I think you need to, if you really want to support those people with cognitive disabilities who are using, if I understand this correctly, using the library's kind of open web or open computer system to serve the web, then I think you need to be also trying to see what's their interest, what are the kind of websites that they usually try to navigate, because I'm sure there is some kind of pattern there, and just trying to understand what navigation really is. That's a good first step, if possible. And then you really need to take away all the clutter and just, draw easy things. We have done before in really tactile things with using cardboard and things to show what navigation actually is. So that is that takes a lot of pedagogical effort to do. And of course that I realize that you may not have time to do that, but hopefully we will learn something from the payment research study that we can use also in a generic way, because I think really the possibility for user groups that are not very digital today to train and practice and try, the trial and error thing in some place where it feels safe. That could also make it easier for family and friends and caregivers to let these people use the web, because that's another perspective of this, that not all people with cognitive disabilities are kind of let out there alone, because the internet is dangerous and social media is dangerous and game is dangerous and everything is dangerous. And yes, things can happen, but still, if you lock people in, I don't think that is a very good solution either. So I'm sorry we couldn't solve the library problem, but I'm happy to have a discussion with you offline if you would like to. I'm sure we have something in our own libraries of solutions from other libraries we have worked with, and can provide you with more detailed information if you would like to have an ongoing discussion. So we have another question here. How can we develop sufficient objective testing criteria such that every auditor will give the same answer for a given website? Otherwise, we can't have real certification. Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, it's difficult. We were not supposed to do too much advertising of our own projects here, but again, when it comes to testing criteria, we did do a recent project trying to see how we can transform general recommendations on cognitive accessibility to really strict objective requirements with complete testing methods as well. And so the method we used in this, just to talk about the process, was both to have consultations with standardization organizations to see what is really the requirements of a testing method that can be objectively applied everywhere. And then we also had consultations with end user organizations. And we had both developers testing the methods and also, of course, loads of end users testing whether the criteria made sense. So it's a bit labor intensive work, and I guess not everything can be made to an objective criteria, but there are loads of requirements. We in this three-year project, we made in the end of 5 measurable criteria, and using, of course, not just inventing them from thin air, but really using recommendations that pre-exist. So what would be interesting is to do more of an inventory of what kinds of criteria or recommendations can be made into more objective ones, and then just do testing. I mean, I have difficulty seeing any other way of getting to real concrete measurable criteria without doing a lot of testing, both with end users and also with people developing interfaces.
And also it's interesting, I don't want to kind of go into politics here, but it's interesting that we usually don't find the existing success criteria very clear. And if you have, I mean, I've been in this business for more than 20 years, and I can assure you that if you have more than one accessibility expert in a room and discuss the success criteria in the interpretation of success criteria in WCAG or the EN standard, then they won't agree. And we see that very clearly now in the review we do of the Web Accessibility Directive, that well, when I worked with the implementation acts of the directive, then no one wanted anything generic. Everyone wanted to do their individual way, and that makes sense because that opens for innovation, and also all the member states have different levels of maturity and history and background and tradition and so on. And again, the websites do differ. So I think it really makes sense that they can do the monitoring in slightly different ways. But now it ends up that the monitoring agencies in all of the many of the member states, I should say, really would like to have a common approach to testing. They want to be able to compare, and they don't want to, I mean, there's a problem because if you do kind of bad testing, so you're not really finding all the problems, then you will end up as one of the top performing countries. But if you do a good job, really having a good methodology, finding all the accessibility problems, then you will be performing bad in the eyes of the European Commission. So that's something we really didn't discuss, at least in the transposition phase. So very, very interesting. So I think there is more and more now in Europe a need for consistency, and there are several projects already going on led by the W3C that has to do with kind of making sure that accessibility experts are interpreting things in the same way, no matter if it's manual or automatic testing. So the ACT rules, I think they now changed the name to something else, but anyway, you can find it. We can send you links to it if you're interested. And of course, also the IAAP are trying to make something similar when it comes to the knowledge needed to be called an accessibility expert. So really the harmonization, the need for consistency and the need for kind of agreement around what accessibility is and what is to be considered good enough and so on, that is maybe an eternal question, but really there is clearly more need now than before, or maybe it's just more vocal now, I don't know. But it's a topic that is also under discussion in the review of the Web Accessibility Directive. So I'm sure we will get back to that in another way. But so this was the world record in long way saying, I don't think this is specific for cognitive. That's what I wanted to say. Sorry for walking a long way for ending up there. There's always a difficulty when it comes to doing objective testing and so on. So I don't know, Sarah, if you have managed to also look in the chat at the same time. There's too many things going on at the same time, so I don't know if there's a hidden question somewhere in the chat that I have missed.
Yeah, there was one question just popped out. I haven't gone through everything, so apologies if I overlooked somebody, but there was just one question now on whether we think that the W3C document on making content accessible for persons with, it's a long title, but learning difficulties is a good document to follow. And from my understanding, what the COGA group is doing is work in progress. So they are also now redoing this and rethinking. There is an updated version of these kind of documents that is going on, and what they are looking at now, if I understand it correctly, is to see what kind of requirements can be transferred into the next revision of the WAKE Act. So I think it would be difficult to have one single document and say, okay, this is the Bible, this is what I'm going to follow. Because also their categories of impairments and difficulties is not covering everything, because nothing can really cover absolutely every need in general. But it's a good start. I think it's quite structured and a good introduction. There are also other documents that perhaps give more of a brief overview, but I mean, it's solid research work that they are doing in the COGA group, so it's absolutely worth following.
And again, I think we can make a short list of the research studies and literature that we have found that we find most interesting from our point of view, and share that with all of you, because there are different sources. And I mean, many of these research reports are, I mean, part of them are extremely good and parts maybe not so much. So maybe a combination of several of them could be a way forward. Okay, so I think that's it. If we do find any questions in the chat later on that we didn't find now, that we will be happy to try to answer that afterwards, or send an email directly to you. So yes, next steps, Sarah. I think this is your slide.
So I was looking at the chat at the same time, and something else came up. What we are doing now is really to provide an interim report for the Commission, and depending on where the gaps are in the research, and also for the from this workshop, we will also send out a survey with more specific questions, and that will be sometimes after the summer break. Probably. And then we have the interim result workshop somewhere in the autumn, where we will have more results, both from the continuing of the research, literature review, and also the results from surveys and workshops. And we are aiming at looking at the final report in the beginning of next year.
And we can also say that anyone interested in participating in the surveys, we will have more targeted surveys for different stakeholder groups. So if you want to make sure to stay in touch with us, then please let us know. So we will collect all the names of people who are interested and make sure that you can take part in the rest of the study to keep on contributing with your knowledge and experience. We are really thankful for your time, obviously, and hope that you will continue to support this work that we do. So I just wanted to end up with saying thank you to everyone. If you do want to reach out to us, you can always reach Sarah and me and the team at cognition@funka.com or our private email addresses, of course. We're always happy to speak to everyone. And please excuse us if we are slow in responding. Sometimes we do have quite a lot of workload, but this is now really our focus, cognitive accessibility. There's so much more to do, and we're really looking forward to providing more solutions in the end. So I would like to also take the opportunity, of course, to thank Sarah, always the most clever person in my life and in everyone's life, I think. And also our fantastic live captionist, Kelly. Please do provide us also with feedback if you have chosen to look at the translated automatic captioning to different languages. That is still something we are testing. We think it's a good service, and until now we have found it also very useful for most users, but maybe if you have any thoughts and ideas about what can be improved. I know that both Caption First, with the supplier of this service, and also we would be really happy to know. And of course, as I always say, using machine learning for captioning is a good thing to do, because machine learning means that the machine is actually learning by listening to more text. So even if you live in an area with a language that not many people speak, like we do in Swedish, we really need to support each other and help the machine to learn, because there is not so much data in these languages. So machine learning is not only cool and helpful and efficient, it's also something we can do together as a community to provide even better accessibility services in the future. But that said, nothing can be as good as a live captionist, of course. And also, yes, we will, of course, share the illustrations done, the graphic recording done by Maja Larsson, and that will be also sent to you a link when we get the result, and that will be on our website. And also, we will make sure that everyone gets a direct link to that results also in the thank you email that we will send out shortly after the webinar. So with that, I think we are finishing this, and now I can have my shower, or I hope everyone can go out in the brilliant sunshine or rain, or where, depending on where you are, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.